My name is Arthur Reynolds, 62 years old, and until recently I thought I understood what it meant to be invisible. That changed the night my daughter Jessica introduced me to her fiancé Blake. His cruel words still echo, "He's a nobody who can't help us." The pain of Jessica's silence hurt even more. What Blake couldn't know was my history with his family, a history. His mother recognized instantly when she saw me. Her face turned pale with recognition. Let me tell you what happened. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Hit subscribe and like if you believe that dignity matters more than social status. I grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood in Detroit, Michigan. My father worked at the automotive plant for 35 years, and my mother cleaned houses to help make ends meet. They weren't wealthy people, but they taught me the value of hard work and integrity. Those lessons stuck with me. By 18, I had graduated high school and immediately found work as a construction laborer. College wasn't in the cards for me, not because I lacked intelligence, but because my family simply couldn't afford it. Besides, I had always been good with my hands and understood how things fit together. The construction site felt natural to me in a way that classrooms never did. The work was backbreaking. I would come home with aching muscles and calloused hands, but there was something deeply satisfying about seeing a building take shape, knowing I had contributed to creating something that would last. I never complained about the long hours or the physical toll. Instead, I focused on learning every aspect of the business. By 23, I had worked my way up to foreman, supervising crews and managing smaller projects. My boss, Frank Donovan, took notice of my work ethic and attention to detail. He began mentoring me, teaching me about bidding on jobs, managing client relationships, and the financial side of the business. Frank had no children of his own, and I think he saw something in me worth nurturing. It was at one of Frank's company barbecues that I met Laura. She was 22, working as a kindergarten teacher, with warm brown eyes and a laugh that made everyone around her smile. She had come as a friend of Frank's niece, and I spotted her from across the yard. I remember thinking she looked out of place among the rough construction crowd, but when our eyes met, something clicked. "You keep staring at me," she said, when I finally worked up the courage to approach her. "Sorry," I replied, embarrassed at being caught. "You just seem like you belong somewhere fancier than a construction worker's barbecue." She laughed. "And where exactly do I belong according to you?" "I do not know," I admitted, "but I would like the chance to find out." We were married a year later. Frank gave us a generous check as a wedding present, which we used as a down payment on a small starter home in the suburbs. Laura continued teaching, and I continued working for Frank, taking on more responsibility with each passing year. For 10 years, Laura and I tried to have a child. The journey was heartbreaking, 3 miscarriages that left us grieving and wondering if parenthood wasn't meant for us. Doctors ran tests but found nothing definitively wrong. Sometimes these things just happen, they would say, as if that explanation could ease our pain. Then, when I was 35 and Laura was 32, the miracle happened. The pregnancy progressed past the danger points, and Jessica came into our world, 7 pounds 4 ounces of perfection, with Laura's brown eyes, and what the nurse called a determined chin. I had never felt such overwhelming love and protectiveness. By then, Frank had helped me start my own small construction company. We focused primarily on commercial buildings, office spaces, small retail locations, and occasionally government contracts. The work was steady, and while we weren't getting rich, we were comfortable. More importantly, I could now set my own hours to make sure I was present for the important moments in Jessica's life. Laura returned to teaching part-time after her maternity leave, and we established a rhythm as parents. I would take Jessica to doctor appointments during my lunch breaks. Laura would handle the morning routine and I would take the evening shift, bathing Jessica and reading her stories until she fell asleep. We were partners in every sense of the word. As Jessica grew, it became clear that she had inherited both Laura's intelligence and my determination. She excelled in school without seeming to try very hard. Her teachers consistently praised her analytical mind and creativity. By middle school, she was taking advanced classes and talking about Ivy League colleges. Laura and I looked at our budget and made adjustments. We opened a college fund and contributed to it religiously, sometimes foregoing vacations or new clothes to ensure there would be enough. I took on additional projects, often working weekends to bring in extra income that went straight into that fund. When Jessica was 16, our world shattered. Laura found a lump during a routine self-examination. The diagnosis came quickly: aggressive breast cancer, already spreading to nearby lymph nodes. The prognosis was guarded at best. For the next 2 years, our lives revolved around treatment schedules, doctor appointments, and managing side effects. I scaled back work hours to care for Laura, taking her to chemotherapy sessions and holding her hand through the worst of it. Jessica, to her credit, stepped up remarkably. She maintained her excellent grades while helping around the house and spending quality time with her mother. But cancer is a merciless enemy. Despite aggressive treatment and Laura's extraordinary will to live, we lost her just 2 months before Jessica's high school graduation. She was 50 and had been looking forward to seeing Jessica accept her diploma as valedictorian. Instead, I sat alone at the ceremony, clutching an empty seat for Laura, trying to smile through my tears as Jessica dedicated her speech to her mother. That summer was a blur of grief for both of us. Jessica seemed to channel her pain into preparation for college, while I threw myself back into work. We circled each other carefully, both aware of the gaping hole in our family, but unsure how to comfort one another, without Laura there to bridge the gap. When fall came, I drove Jessica to Yale, where she had been accepted with a partial scholarship. The rest was covered by the fund Laura and I had built, and a portion of the life insurance money. As I helped her set up her dorm room, I could sense her eagerness to begin this new chapter. There was an energy on campus, a palpable sense of ambition and possibility that I knew would be good for her. "You call me any time, day or night," I told her as we said goodbye, "and I will be here for Parents' Weekend in October." Jessica hugged me tightly. "I love you, Dad," she said. "Thank you for making this possible." Driving home alone to our now empty house, I felt both immensely proud and profoundly lonely. The journey was just beginning for Jessica. For me, it felt like an important chapter was closing. The first change I noticed when Jessica came home for Thanksgiving break her freshman year was her voice. The slight Midwestern accent had been replaced by something more neutral, almost patrician. Her vocabulary had expanded too, peppered with academic terms and references to philosophers I had never read. "Dad, you would not believe the discourse in Professor Harrington's seminar," she said, using her hands expressively as she talked. "His deconstructionist approach to classic American literature is completely reshaping how I think about narrative structure." I nodded and smiled, not understanding half of what she was saying, but delighted by her enthusiasm. She seemed to be thriving, making friends with students from all over the world, joining clubs, and earning top marks in her classes. If she sometimes looked at our modest home with new eyes, noticing the dated kitchen cabinets or the worn carpet in ways she never had before, I chose not to mention it. During her sophomore year, our phone calls became less frequent. She was busy, she explained, with study groups and extracurricular activities. When I did reach her, our conversations grew shorter, filled with awkward pauses as we searched for common ground. "How is work, Dad?" she would ask dutifully. "Same as always," I would reply. "Just finished a medical office building in Troy. starting a retail complex next month. That is great, she would say, but I could hear her attention drifting. Construction projects could not compete with the intellectual stimulation of her new world. When summer came, Jessica announced she had secured an internship with a consulting firm in Boston. It was an incredible opportunity, she explained. They almost never took sophomores, but her economics professor had connections and had recommended her highly. I was hoping you would come home for the summer, I said, trying to keep the disappointment from my voice. Dad, I cannot pass this up, she replied. It will look amazing on my resume, and they pay really well. She was right, of course. This was exactly what Laura and I had worked so hard to give her opportunities beyond what we had. I could not stand in her way now because I was lonely. By junior year, Jessica had fully assimilated into the elite academic environment. Her friends were the children of executives, politicians, and old money families. Her internships took her to New York and once to London. When I visited campus, I felt increasingly out of place among the well-heeled parents discussing vacation homes and investment portfolios. During one such visit, I overheard a conversation that stuck with me. Jessica was introducing me to her roommate's parents, a surgeon and a law professor from Connecticut. Your daughter is absolutely brilliant, the mother said to me. She mentioned you work in construction. I own a commercial construction company, I clarified. How fascinating, she replied with a tight smile that suggested it was anything but. Is that what inspired Jessica to study economic development? Seeing buildings go up in struggling areas. Before I could answer, Jessica jumped in. Dad has always emphasized the importance of education and expanding my horizons, she said smoothly, effectively sidestepping any direct connection between her studies and my blue-collar business. Later that night, alone in my hotel room, I replayed the interaction and recognized what had happened. Jessica had been embarrassed by my occupation. The realization cut deep, but I pushed the hurt aside. Children were supposed to surpass their parents. That was the American dream, wasn't it? What Jessica did not know was that my business had grown substantially over the years. While not glamorous by Ivy League standards, Reynolds Construction had secured several major contracts with the state and had expanded to employ over 50 people. I lived modestly by choice, not necessity, investing the profits back into the business and maintaining a comfortable but not flashy lifestyle. During Jessica's senior year, a larger regional firm approached me about acquiring Reynolds Construction. The timing seemed right. I was nearing 60, thinking about retirement, and had no successor since Jessica had shown zero interest in the family business. After months of negotiation, I agreed to sell for a sum that, while not putting me in the same league as her friend's parents, certainly qualified me as financially secure for the rest of my life. I did not tell Jessica about the sale or the money. Something held me back, perhaps a desire to see if our relationship could strengthen based on genuine connection rather than financial status. Or maybe I was testing whether she valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. After graduation, Jessica accepted a position with an investment bank in New York. Her starting salary was more than most of my employees made after years of service. She found an apartment in Manhattan with 2 classmates, and her visits home became annual events, Christmas only, and rarely for more than 3 days. Our phone relationship settled into a pattern. She would call once every few weeks, give a brief update on her work achievements, ask perfunctory questions about my life, and end the call when someone more interesting demanded her attention. I started seeing a therapist to help process my feelings of abandonment. Dr. Miller helped me understand that Jessica's behavior wasn't necessarily personal rejection, but rather a common pattern when children move between social classes. She's navigating a world very different from the one you raised her in, Dr. Miller explained. Part of establishing herself in that world involves some separation from her origins. It doesn't mean she doesn't love you. I tried to take comfort in that explanation, but the gulf between us continued to widen. I sold my larger home and bought a beautiful but modest waterfront property outside Detroit, a longtime dream that Laura and I had shared. I joined a local boating club, made new friends, and even tried dating a few times, though no relationship ever progressed very far. The shadow of Laura remained too strong. 2 years into Jessica's New York life, I had settled into a routine of semi-retirement. I consulted occasionally on construction projects, volunteered with Habitat for Humanity, and spent peaceful mornings fishing off my dock. If I sometimes felt invisible to my only child, I tried to focus on the fullness of the life I had built, despite that pain. Then came the phone call that would change everything. It was a Tuesday evening in April when my phone rang with Jessica's name on the caller ID. Unusual since our calls typically happened on Sunday afternoons. Even more unusual was the excitement in her voice when I answered. "Dad, I have amazing news," she exclaimed, sounding more animated than I had heard in years. "What is it, sweetheart?" I asked, setting aside the book I had been reading. "I am engaged. His name is Blake Whitfield. He is an attorney at Sterling & Moore, one of the top law firms in Manhattan. We have been dating for 8 months." 8 months. My daughter had been in a serious relationship for 8 months and had never mentioned it. I swallowed the hurt and focused on her happiness. "That is wonderful news, Jessica. Congratulations. Tell me about him." She launched into a description of Blake that sounded more like a resume than a portrayal of the man she loved. Harvard Law second in his class. Junior partner on the fast track to full partnership. Family from Connecticut, with connections throughout the legal and financial world. Summer home in the Hamptons. Condo on the Upper East Side. "He sounds accomplished," I said when she paused for breath. "He is incredible, Dad. You are going to love him. And his family is so interesting. His father is a federal judge, and his mother serves on the boards of several major cultural institutions. I look forward to meeting them all," I said sincerely. Perhaps this new connection would bring Jessica back into my life in a more meaningful way. Maybe grandchildren would follow, and I could establish the kind of close relationship with them that seemed to have slipped away with my daughter. "Actually, that is why I am calling," Jessica continued. "Blake's parents are coming to New York this weekend, and we are having a dinner on Saturday to celebrate the engagement. I really want you to be there." The invitation caught me off guard. Jessica had never asked me to come to New York before. "Of course I will be there," I said, already mentally rearranging my schedule. "Just tell me when and where." 7 o'clock at Le Bernardin, she replied. "It is very exclusive, so please wear your best suit." Blake was able to get a reservation through a client connection. After we hung up, I sat staring out at the lake, emotions swirling. Joy for Jessica's happiness, mixed with anxiety about meeting her future in-laws. These were clearly people of wealth and social standing. Would they look down on me the way Jessica's college friends' parents had? And underneath it all, a quiet hope that this milestone might bridge the gap that had grown between us. The next few days were a flurry of preparation. I made plane reservations and booked a hotel in Midtown. I took my best suit to be pressed and realized it was somewhat out of style, so I visited a high-end men's store for a new one, navy blue with a subtle pattern which the salesman assured me was both classic and current. I got a haircut and even splurged on a professional shave. On Saturday morning, I flew to New York, checked into my hotel, and spent the afternoon walking through Central Park, rehearsing what I might say to Blake and his parents. I wanted to make a good impression for Jessica's sake. Around 5, I returned to the hotel to shower and change for the evening. Looking in the mirror as I adjusted my tie, I saw a man who had aged well enough, still fit from years of physical work and weekend hikes, silver hair, neatly trimmed, face weathered, but dignified. I was not sophisticated or polished like Blake's father would surely be, but I had integrity and had raised a daughter good enough for their son. That had to count for something. I took a taxi to the restaurant, arriving 15 minutes early. Le Bernardin was everything Jessica had implied, elegant, hushed with staff, who moved with practiced precision. I gave my name to the maitre d', who informed me that the rest of the party had not yet arrived. He seated me at a large table near the back, and I ordered a club soda with lime while I waited. Jessica arrived first, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She air-kissed my cheek, a gesture so unlike the bear hugs of her childhood that it momentarily stunned me. "You look beautiful, Jess," I said. "Thank you, Dad. You clean up pretty nicely yourself," she replied with a quick smile. Her eyes were already scanning the restaurant, looking for Blake and his parents. When she spotted them at the entrance, she waved discreetly. "Here they are," she said, standing. "Remember, Blake's father is Judge Whitfield, so address him properly." Blake was tall and trim, in an expertly tailored suit with perfectly styled dark hair and features that belonged on a magazine cover. Handsome in a conventional, almost manufactured way. His handshake was firm but brief, his smile not quite reaching his eyes as he assessed me. "So, you are the famous Arthur," he said. "Jessica has told me some fascinating stories about growing up in—" "Where was it again, darling?" "Detroit." Jessica supplied a slight flush on her cheeks. "Right, Detroit. Quite a change from Connecticut, I imagine." Before I could respond, he turned to introduce his parents. My father, Judge Richard Whitfield, and my mother, Margaret Whitfield. Judge Whitfield was imposing in his Brooks Brothers suit, with a full head of white hair and the confident bearing of a man accustomed to respect. He shook my hand with the practiced cordiality of someone who meets constituents for a living. "Pleasure to meet you, sir," I said. "Likewise." He replied, his tone neutral, but not unfriendly. As we all took our seats, Blake immediately launched into a story about a case he was working on using legal terminology that seemed calculated to exclude me from the conversation. Jessica nodded along enthusiastically, occasionally touching his arm or laughing at inside jokes. The waiter arrived to take our orders. When he came to me, I hesitated briefly over the unfamiliar French menu items. "The foie gras is excellent," Blake interjected before I could speak, "though perhaps a bit sophisticated for some palates." I felt Jessica tense beside me. "I will try the salmon," I told the waiter, choosing one of the few items I recognized. "Excellent choice, sir," the waiter replied kindly. As appetizers were served, Blake turned his attention to me. "Jessica tells me you worked in construction before retiring. Must have been hard physical labor." "I owned a commercial construction company," I clarified. "We built office complexes, retail spaces, and some municipal buildings throughout Michigan." "A small operation, I assume," Blake pressed. "We employed about 50 people at our peak." Blake nodded dismissively. "Interesting. My grandfather started with a small business too, a single hardware store. Now Whitfield Enterprises owns a chain of home improvement centers across the Northeast." The conversation continued in this vein throughout the appetizer course. Every comment I made, Blake would find a way to subtly diminish. When I mentioned fishing on the lake behind my house, he countered with stories of deep-sea fishing off his family's yacht. When I talked about volunteering with Habitat for Humanity, he talked over me about his pro bono work with much larger impact. Jessica said nothing to defend me. Occasionally, she would change the subject when Blake's condescension became too obvious, but more often she would smile along as if his behavior was perfectly acceptable. Each silent moment felt like a small betrayal. As the main course arrived, Blake steered the conversation toward his career ambitions. The firm is positioning me to handle the Westridge corporate merger next year, he announced. It will be the largest deal the firm has managed in a decade, and they are trusting me as lead counsel, despite my relatively junior status. That is impressive, Judge Whitfield commented. Good connections at the firm are essential for advancement. Blake nodded, then turned to me with a calculated look. Arthur Jessica mentioned you might have some connections in the Detroit business community that could be useful. Any major players in the corporate world you could introduce me to? We are looking to expand our client base in the Midwest. The question caught me off guard. Jessica had never asked about my business contacts, and I doubted she had any idea who I knew or did not know in the corporate world. I worked primarily with local businesses and regional developers, I replied honestly. I do not have connections at the level you are probably looking for. Blake's smile tightened. He leaned toward Jessica, but spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. Why did you bring him? He is a nobody who cannot help us. The table fell silent. Judge Whitfield looked uncomfortable. Jessica stared at her plate, her face flushed with embarrassment. Not at Blake's rudeness, I realized with a sinking heart, but at my apparent uselessness to her fiancé's ambitions. In that moment I saw with perfect clarity what I had become to my daughter, an obligation, a background character in her new narrative, valuable only insofar as I could advance her in her chosen world. Excuse me, I said quietly, standing from the table. I need a moment. I walked to the restroom on legs that felt wooden, locked myself in a stall, and took several deep breaths. Memories flooded in unbidden Jessica, as a toddler, arms raised for me to pick her up. Jessica at 8 proudly showing me a science project we had worked on together. Jessica at 16 holding my hand at Laura's funeral. Our shared grief, a terrible bond. How had we come to this? How had the daughter I had sacrificed so much for become someone who would sit silently while I was humiliated? After splashing cold water on my face, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. You are not a nobody, I told myself firmly. Laura would be ashamed of how Jessica is behaving, but you will not stoop to Blake's level. With my dignity gathered around me like armor, I returned to the table, determined to make it through the remainder of this painful evening. When I returned to the table, Blake was in the middle of explaining the intricacies of his latest court victory to his father. Jessica glanced at me with what might have been concern, but quickly returned her attention to her fiancé. I took my seat silently, focusing on my half-eaten meal. Before dessert arrives, Blake announced, I wanted to let you know that my parents have some exciting news of their own. Judge Whitfield smiled. I have been nominated for the Federal Appeals Court. The confirmation hearings begin next month. Congratulations, I said sincerely. That is quite an achievement. Richard has worked toward this his entire career, Margaret Whitfield added, speaking for the first time that evening. Her voice was cultured and soft. We are thrilled, though it means a more public profile for the family. Blake nodded importantly. Which is why everything needs to be perfect for the engagement announcement and the wedding planning. The right connections, the right venue, the right people. His emphasis on right made it clear which category he placed me in. Jessica reached for her water glass, avoiding my eyes. The waiter approached to refill our drinks, providing a momentary reprieve from the uncomfortable conversation. Actually, Blake continued, checking his watch. Mother, father, I believe Tom and Susan Harrington are dining here tonight as well. Tom is on the Senate Judiciary Committee, he added for my benefit, though his tone suggested I wouldn't understand the significance. They mentioned wanting to congratulate you in person. They should be arriving soon. Perhaps we should invite them to join us for dessert, Judge Whitfield suggested. An excellent idea, Blake agreed. Their son Andrew is at Harvard Law now, Jessica. He would be a good connection for you as well. The casual way they discussed collecting connections like trading cards made me uncomfortable. This was not how I had raised Jessica to view relationships. "I believe the Harringtons just arrived," Blake said, glancing toward the entrance. "Dad. Mom, would you mind greeting them? It would make a good impression if you approached them first, rather than waiting for them to come to our table." Judge Whitfield nodded and stood offering his arm to his wife. As they walked toward the front of the restaurant, Blake turned to Jessica. "Once this dinner is over, we need to discuss whether your father should have a visible role in the wedding," he said, in a low voice, apparently forgetting I was right there. "Given Dad's nomination and the social circles that will be attending, we need to consider the optics carefully." Before Jessica could respond, we heard a gasp from across the restaurant. I looked up to see Margaret Whitfield frozen in place, her face drained of color as she stared in my direction. Her hand clutched her husband's arm so tightly that her knuckles were white. "Margaret," Judge Whitfield said with concern, "are you all right?" She did not answer him. Instead, she continued to stare at me, her eyes wide with what could only be described as fear. Her purse slipped from her grasp, falling to the floor with a soft thud. Blake stood immediately. "Mother, what is wrong?" Margaret Whitfield swayed slightly, and her husband steadied her. "I think she needs some air," he said, looking confused. "Blake, perhaps you should help me take her outside for a moment." Blake hurried to his mother's side, but she had regained enough composure to speak. "No," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am fine. Just felt dizzy for a moment." Her eyes never left my face as she allowed her husband and son to guide her back to our table. As she took her seat, her purse now retrieved by a helpful waiter, I met her gaze directly. "It has been a long time, Maggie," I said quietly. Blake looked between us in confusion. "You two know each other." Margaret's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. We worked together, briefly, many years ago." "You never mentioned knowing Jessica's father." Judge Whitfield said, his brow furrowed. "It was before I met you, Richard," she replied quickly. "A short-term position. I did not make the connection until just now." The explanation seemed to satisfy her husband, but Blake was staring at his mother with suspicion. Jessica looked equally confused, her eyes darting between Margaret and me. "What a small world," Judge Whitfield said, attempting to smooth over the awkward moment. "Where did you work together?" Before Margaret could answer, I spoke. "It was on one of my first major construction projects in Detroit. Maggie, Mrs. Whitfield, worked in the office handling the accounts. 30 years ago, Margaret, then just Maggie Peterson, had been hired as the bookkeeper for Reynolds Construction's first significant commercial project, a 5-story office building in downtown Detroit. She was young, efficient, and seemingly dedicated. I had trusted her completely with the project finances. That trust had been misplaced. 6 months into the project, I discovered discrepancies in the accounts. Further investigation revealed that Maggie had been systematically embezzling funds, creating false invoices, and pocketing the difference. The total amount was over $200,000, a sum that nearly bankrupted my fledgling company. When confronted, Maggie had broken down in tears. She was a single mother with a young son, Blake, though I had not made that connection until this moment and had fallen into debt. She begged me not to press charges, promising to repay as much as she could immediately. Against my lawyer's advice, I had agreed to a private settlement. Maggie returned $150,000, which she claimed was all she had left, and signed a notarized document admitting to the theft. In exchange, I did not report her to the authorities. The document specified that if she ever paid back the remaining 50,000, I would destroy the evidence of her crime. She never paid the remaining sum, and I had kept the document in my safe all these years, not out of any desire for revenge, but simply because destroying it seemed like erasing a painful but important lesson about trust. "That is right," Margaret said faintly, her composure clearly shaken. "It was just a temporary position while I was between opportunities." "Mother, you never told me you worked in construction management," Blake said, his tone suggesting such work was beneath her. "As I said, it was very brief," she insisted, avoiding my eyes now. The tension at the table was palpable. Judge Whitfield was watching his wife with concern, while Blake seemed annoyed by this unexpected development. Jessica just looked confused. "Arthur," Judge Whitfield said, making an obvious attempt to change the subject. "Jessica tells us you live on a lake now. Do you do much boating?" I was about to answer when my phone buzzed with a text message. I normally would never check my phone during dinner, but given the circumstances, I welcomed the distraction. To my surprise, the message was from a number I did not recognize. "Please don't tell them. I'll do anything. Margaret." I looked up to see Margaret watching me intently, her phone partially concealed in her lap. She must have gotten my number from Jessica. "Everything all right?" Jessica asked. "Just a neighbor checking on something." I lied, putting my phone away. "Nothing urgent." "I need to use the restroom," Margaret announced suddenly. "Excuse me for a moment." As she stood, she gave me a meaningful look. The message was clear. She wanted to speak privately. "I think I will step out for some fresh air myself," I said after a moment. "Excuse me." I made my way to the front of the restaurant and stepped outside into the cool evening air. A few minutes later, Margaret appeared, looking around anxiously before approaching me. "Arthur," she began, her voice trembling. "I had no idea. I never made the connection that Jessica Reynolds was your daughter." "Life is full of surprising coincidences," I replied evenly. "Please," she whispered urgently. "Richard doesn't know about what happened in Detroit. No one does. It would destroy everything: his nomination, Blake's position at the firm, our standing in the community." "I have kept your secret for 30 years, Maggie," I said. "I did not bring it up tonight." "But you could," she said, her eyes filled with fear. "You could tell them everything." I looked at this elegant, polished woman and tried to reconcile her with the desperate young mother who had sobbed in my office 3 decades ago. She had clearly built a new life for herself, a good life by all appearances. Had she changed, I wondered, or just become better at concealing her true nature? "Your son called me a nobody tonight," I said quietly. "He humiliated me in front of my daughter," and she sat there silently. Margaret closed her eyes briefly. "Blake has always had a sense of entitlement. Richard's family has money and status, and Blake grew up expecting the world to defer to him. I have tried to instill better values, but what?" I pressed when she trailed off. "But perhaps I was too focused on maintaining appearances," she admitted, "on making sure we were accepted in certain circles. I wanted Blake to have every advantage I didn't have growing up." The irony was not lost on me. Margaret had stolen from me allegedly to provide for her son, and that son had grown into a man who looked down on people like me. "What are you going to do?" she asked finally. "Nothing," I replied. "I did not keep your secret for 30 years just to reveal it now out of petty revenge. But I would appreciate if you could perhaps remind Blake about the importance of treating people with respect, regardless of their social standing." Relief flooded her face. "Of course. Yes, absolutely." As we turned to go back inside, she paused. The remaining 50,000, I could pay it back with interest. Would that close this chapter for good? I considered her offer. This isn't about money, Margaret. It never was. We returned to the table separately to avoid suspicion. When I took my seat, I noticed an immediate change in the atmosphere. Blake, who had been dismissive and condescending all evening, was now watching me with curiosity and a hint of wariness. Margaret returned moments later, her composure restored. As she sat down, she looked directly at her son. Blake, I was just thinking about what Arthur said about his volunteer work with Habitat for Humanity. That shows a remarkable commitment to community service. Arthur is clearly a man of great integrity, something you could learn from. Blake's jaw literally dropped. Mother, I mean it, she continued firmly. Success isn't measured only by credentials or connections, but by character. Arthur raised a wonderful daughter as a single father while running his own business. That deserves respect. Jessica was staring at her future mother-in-law with undisguised shock. Judge Whitfield seemed equally surprised by his wife's sudden championing of me, but nodded in agreement. Margaret is right, he said. Different paths in life require different kinds of strength. For the remainder of the dinner, there was a notable shift in Blake's behavior. Gone was the overt condescension, replaced by a cautious politeness. He even asked several seemingly genuine questions about my construction experience, though I suspected the change was motivated more by confusion over his mother's unexpected endorsement than by any real change of heart. As dessert was served, I caught Margaret watching me with a complex mixture of gratitude and shame. The power dynamic at the table had shifted in a way no one except the two of us fully understood. For the first time that evening, Jessica was looking at me with something approaching respect, or at least curiosity. When the evening finally ended and we stood outside waiting for our respective cars, Margaret approached me once more. "Thank you," she said simply. I nodded in acknowledgement. "Good night, Margaret. Judge Whitfield, congratulations again on your nomination." As my taxi pulled away, I saw Jessica watching me through the restaurant window, her expression thoughtful. Something had changed tonight, though I wasn't yet sure exactly what. The next morning, my hotel phone rang at 8:30. It was Jessica. "Dad, we need to talk," she said without preamble. "Can I come to your hotel?" "Of course," I replied, surprised by the request. "I am in room 712. 45 minutes later, there was a knock at my door. Jessica stood in the hallway, looking tired, as if she had not slept well. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. The room was small but neat, with a view of the neighboring building rather than any New York landmark. Jessica sat on the edge of the bed, declining my offer of coffee from the in-room machine. She looked around, taking in my open suitcase and the book on the nightstand. "Something strange happened last night," she began. "I have never seen Blake's mother react that way to anyone. And you clearly know each other better than you let on." I sat in the desk chair, considering my response. "We have history," I acknowledged. "From before she was Mrs. Whitfield." "What kind of history?" Jessica pressed. "The kind that is not my story alone to tell," I replied. "But it made me realize we need to have an honest conversation, Jessica. About us. About how far apart we have grown." She looked down at her hands. "I know things have been distant between us." "Distant is an understatement," I said, keeping my tone gentle despite the hurt behind the words. "You have been pulling away from me for years. Last night you sat silently while your fiancé called me a nobody." Jessica flinched. "I should have said something. I know that." I just froze. "Why?" I asked. What were you afraid of? She was quiet for a long moment. Losing the life I've built, she finally admitted. The connections, the opportunities. It sounds terrible saying it out loud. At least it is honest, I said. Jessica stood suddenly. I want to see where you live now. You sold the house and bought something on a lake, but I have never seen it. I think I need to understand your life better. The request surprised me. I am flying back this afternoon. I can take tomorrow off, she said decisively. Let me come with you today, stay overnight, and fly back tomorrow evening. All right, I agreed. There is a flight at 2. I will see if they have another seat available. By some miracle, or perhaps fate, the seat next to mine was available. We spent the flight mostly in silence, Jessica alternating between staring out the window and typing emails on her phone. I wondered what she was expecting to find at my home and what she hoped this visit would accomplish. When we landed in Detroit, I led Jessica to my car in the long-term parking lot. Not the luxury vehicle she might have expected, but a practical 3-year-old Ford Escape. You still have all your tools in the back, she observed as she put her overnight bag in the trunk. Old habits, I replied with a slight smile. Never know when you might need to fix something. The drive to my lakefront home took about 40 minutes. As we turned down the private road leading to the property, Jessica's eyes widened. This area is beautiful, she said, taking in the mature trees and glimpses of blue water between the houses. Your mother and I always dreamed of living on water someday, I told her. We used to drive through neighborhoods like this on Sunday afternoons, picking out our favorite houses. I pulled into the driveway of a cedar-sided home nestled among tall pines. It was not ostentatious by lakefront standards, about 2,500 square feet, with a large deck facing the water, but it was well-maintained and welcoming. This is it? Jessica asked, sounding genuinely surprised. Home sweet home? I confirmed, grabbing our bags from the trunk. For the past 3 years. I led her inside where the open floor plan revealed a comfortable living area with large windows overlooking the lake. The furniture was a mix of pieces from our old house, including the recliner where I had read Jessica bedtime stories, and newer items chosen for comfort rather than style. Jessica wandered through the space, pausing to look at family photos displayed on bookshelves and tables. Most featured her at various ages, often with Laura and me. A few newer ones showed me with friends from my boating club or volunteer groups. You have a beautiful home, Dad, she said finally. I had no idea. There's a lot you don't know about my life now, I replied without accusation. Just as there's a lot I don't know about yours. I showed her to the guest room, which I had set up with a reading nook by the window and a small desk. Take some time to settle in, I suggested. I will start dinner. We can eat on the deck if you would like. While Jessica freshened up, I prepared a simple meal of grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, and rice pilaf, nothing fancy, but healthful and satisfying. As I worked, I could hear her moving about the house, opening doors, examining photos. We ate on the deck as the sun began to set over the lake, casting golden light across the water. For a while, we talked of neutral topics: Jessica's apartment in New York, my volunteer work, mutual acquaintances from her childhood. As dusk deepened, however, Jessica finally broached the subject that had brought her here. Blake's mother called me this morning, she said, setting down her wineglass. She was checking that I got home safely, but I could tell she wanted to know if you had said anything about her. And what did you tell her? I asked. That we hadn't discussed her, Jessica replied. Which was true at the time. Dad, what happened between you two, it's clearly significant. I looked out at the darkening water, considering how much to reveal. After dinner, I decided. There's something I need to show you first. When we had cleared the dishes, I led Jessica to my home office. From the safe hidden behind a landscape painting, I removed a sealed envelope. Inside was the document Margaret had signed 30 years earlier, admitting to her theft and detailing our settlement agreement. I handed it to Jessica. "Read this," I said simply. Her eyes widened as she scanned the document. "Blake's mother embezzled from your company. She's a thief. She was a desperate single mother who made a terrible choice," I corrected. "People are complicated, Jessica. They're not all good or all bad. Does Judge Whitfield know? Does Blake?" "No," I said firmly, "and they won't hear it from me." Jessica looked at me with new eyes. "You could have ruined her last night. Destroyed their family with one revelation." "And what would that have accomplished?" I asked. "More pain, more division. I didn't want revenge 30 years ago, and I don't want it now." Jessica sat heavily in the office chair. "I don't understand. After how Blake treated you, after how I—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "After how you sat silently while I was humiliated," I completed gently. "Jessica, I raised you to be better than that. But I also raised you to understand that people make mistakes, including you, including me." "Is that why you never told me you sold the company?" she asked suddenly. "I saw the article in your office just now. Reynolds Construction acquired in multi-million-dollar deal. You're not just comfortable, you're wealthy." "Money has never been what's important to me," I said. "What matters is how we treat people, especially those we claim to love." Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "I've been so focused on climbing the ladder, on fitting into a world that values the wrong things. I started believing that status and connections were what mattered." "You're not alone in that," I told her. "It's an easy trap to fall into." "Blake's mother was right," Jessica said quietly. "You are a man of integrity, and I've been ashamed of you instead of proud. What does that say about who I've become?" "It says you're still figuring things out," I replied. "We all are at every age. Your mother would tell you the same thing." Jessica stood and moved to the window, looking out at the now dark lake with its reflection of stars. "I don't know if I should marry Blake," she said after a long silence. "Last night showed me sides of him I can't ignore." "That's your decision to make," I told her. "But make it based on character, not credentials." "Will you still walk me down the aisle if I do marry him?" she asked, turning to face me. "I will always be your father, Jessica. Through every choice, good or bad. That never changes." She crossed the room and hugged me, then not the perfunctory embrace I had grown accustomed to, but a real hug like when she was a child. And for the first time in years, I felt like her father again. In the weeks that followed that transformative weekend, subtle but significant shifts occurred in my relationship with Jessica. She began calling more frequently, not out of obligation, but with genuine interest in my life. Our conversations grew longer and more substantive, touching on everything from books we were reading to deeper questions about values and priorities. Blake's behavior toward me improved dramatically, though I suspected his newfound respect was motivated more by fear of what I might reveal than by any genuine change of heart. Margaret had clearly spoken to him about treating me with more consideration, though whatever explanation she had given him seemed to have left him both wary and confused. Margaret herself reached out to me directly, sending a formal letter with a cashier's check for $50,000 plus 30 years of calculated interest. The accompanying note was brief but sincere. "Arthur enclosed, please find the remaining debt plus interest. Your discretion and integrity have given me a second chance at life that I did not deserve but have tried to honor. While this payment cannot erase the past, I hope it might close this chapter between us. With deepest gratitude, Margaret." I deposited the check in a separate account, intending to donate the entire sum to a program supporting single parents in financial crisis. It seemed fitting that money taken out of desperation should find its way back to helping others in similar situations. Jessica and Blake continued their engagement, though Jessica confided that she had insisted on premarital counseling to address some concerns about their relationship. She had also begun reconnecting with old friends from Detroit, people she had drifted away from during her years of social climbing. I realized I've been surrounding myself with people who only value what I can do for them, she told me during one of our calls. I'd forgotten what real friendship feels like. 3 months after that fateful dinner in New York, when I received an invitation to join Jessica for lunch when she visited Detroit for a college friend's baby shower. We met at a casual waterfront restaurant near my home, a far cry from the pretentious setting of our previous meal together. I have been doing a lot of thinking, Jessica said, as we enjoyed our sandwiches on the outdoor patio, about what really matters, about the kind of person I want to be. And what conclusions have you reached? I asked. That I've been measuring success all wrong, she admitted. I've been so focused on appearances and status that I lost sight of substance. That's a valuable realization, I said. One many people never make. I've started volunteering at a literacy program in Harlem, she continued, teaching adults to read. It's more fulfilling than any networking event I've ever attended. I smiled, recognizing echoes of the compassionate child she had been. Your mother would be proud of that. I've also been thinking about my career path, Jessica said. Banking isn't what I want long term. I'm considering going back to school for a degree in urban development, using finance skills to help rebuild communities instead of just making rich people richer. That sounds like meaningful work, I replied, genuinely pleased by this evolution in her thinking. Blake isn't thrilled about it, she admitted. He sees it as stepping off the fast track, but I think he's starting to understand this is important to me. As our lunch continued, Jessica asked thoughtful questions about my construction career, questions she had never bothered to ask before. I found myself sharing stories about challenging projects, difficult clients, and the satisfaction of building something lasting. She listened with genuine interest, occasionally connecting my experiences to her own workplace challenges. Dad, she said, as we were finishing our meal, would you be willing to help me understand more about the practical side of development? The things you can't learn in business school about how buildings actually get built. It would give me an edge in the program I'm applying to. The request touched me deeply. For the first time in years, my daughter was not only acknowledging my expertise, but asking to learn from it. I would be honored, I told her sincerely. In the months that followed, Jessica visited more frequently. We would tour development sites together, and I would explain the intricacies of construction timelines, materials selection, and the complex dance of coordinating subcontractors. She took notes and asked incisive questions that made me see my own industry through fresh eyes. 8 months after that revealing dinner in New York, Jessica and Blake were married in a ceremony that was elegant, but far less ostentatious than originally planned. Jessica had insisted on scaling back, redirecting some of the budget to donations to several community organizations. As I prepared to walk her down the aisle, she squeezed my arm. "Thank you for never giving up on me," she whispered, "even when I made it so hard to stay connected." "That's what parents do," I replied simply. Judge Whitfield's confirmation to the federal appeals court had gone through without incident, his family's reputation intact. As I stood at the reception, making small talk with other guests, Margaret approached me discreetly. "I want you to know," she said quietly, "that I think of what happened between us every day. Not with fear anymore, but as a reminder to live with integrity. Your mercy changed the course of my life." "We all deserve second chances," I told her. "The important thing is what we do with them." Blake had indeed modified his behavior toward me, though I harbored no illusions about us ever becoming close. What mattered was that he treated Jessica with love and respect, which he seemed to do despite his other shortcomings. After the wedding, I continued building my new life. I expanded my volunteer work, joined the board of a community foundation, and even began dating a kind widow I met through my boating club. Gail was warm and unpretentious, with a laugh that sometimes reminded me of Laura's. We enjoyed simple pleasures together, fishing, cooking, attending local concerts, without pretense or social climbing. Jessica and Blake settled in New York, but she made good on her plan to shift her career focus. She completed a master's program in urban development and took a position with a nonprofit focused on creating affordable housing in underserved communities. She called me regularly for advice on construction matters, creating a bridge between our worlds that had been missing for so long. The experience with Blake and his family had taught me profound lessons about power, dignity, and the true measure of a person's worth. I had discovered that real influence doesn't come from social status or connections, but from integrity maintained even when no one is watching. The document I had kept for 30 years had given me power over Margaret Whitfield, but the choice not to use it had given me something far more valuable: self-respect. In the end, I realized that being called a nobody by someone like Blake said more about him than it did about me. True significance isn't determined by how others see us, but by how we see ourselves and the values we live by each day. As I stand here today looking back on that challenging chapter of my life, I wonder, have you ever been underestimated or dismissed by someone who later had to reconsider? How did you maintain your dignity in the face of disrespect? Leave a comment below and share your story. And if this tale of quiet integrity resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength in unexpected moments. Thank you for listening, and remember, your worth is never determined by those who fail to see it.